There's a kind of peace that only gardens understand. The quiet rhythm of sunlight, the scent of fresh soil, and the way small things grow without hurry. Here at TERAFLORA Studio, we believe beauty doesn't always come from what is new. Sometimes, it's reborn from what we thought was lost. Every bolt, every piece of metal, every forgotten object can hold a second life, not as waste but as art. In this story, we'll wander through gardens where strength meets tenderness, where steel learns softness, and where color transforms even the simplest shapes into poetry. Let your mind slow down as we walk together through corners of still air and golden light. You'll see how upcycled creations, planters, borders, lanterns, and sculptures become part of the earth again, each one carrying a whisper of human care. It's not just about design, it's about rediscovery. It's about finding calm in creation. This content was lovingly crafted and thoughtfully composed with the help of AI, guided by human imagination and artistic intention. A gentle reminder that technology, when used with heart, can help us reconnect with the natural world in unexpected ways. If this journey speaks to you, take a moment to subscribe to TERAFLORA Studio. Join our growing circle of dreamers, makers, and quiet observers, those who see not just gardens, but stories written in sunlight and soil. Now take a breath. Let's begin. In every garden, there are stories hidden beneath the petals. Some bloom loudly with color, while others whisper through the small details that hold everything together. At TERAFLORA Studio, we found beauty not in the grand or the new, but in what once seemed forgotten. Large bolts once part of a fading fence, now reborn as rustic guardians of the soil. Each bolt carries a past, the memory of rain, the echo of machines, the scent of earth after metal meets paint. When brushed with shades of terracotta and mint, they soften, humbling themselves among the marigolds and asters that dance in the sunlight. Their edges catch the light just enough to shimmer, not to boast, but to remind us that beauty often comes from endurance. As the seasons turn, the bolts stay, silent anchors in a world that changes daily. Around them, the soil breathes, the sedum thickens, the chrysanthemums open wider each dawn. The garden becomes not just a display of color but a meditation of renewal. Proof that what was once industrial and lifeless can pulse again with warmth and wonder. In this small corner of the world, art meets memory. The vibrant garden border is no longer just decoration. It's a conversation between the human hand and nature's rhythm. The pastel hues invite the eye to linger, to slow down, to feel the texture of sunlight on paint and the scent of earth after rain. The bolts, once forgotten junk, now speak of resilience, of beauty reclaimed through intention. Perhaps that's what makes every garden alive, the way it teaches us to see the extraordinary in the ordinary. In the end, the rustic bolt border stands quietly, neither flashy nor fragile, just present, holding space for roots, petals, and the quiet grace of transformation. Morning arrives softly, carrying with it the scent of damp soil and the first whisper of light. The garden awakens slowly, petals unfolding, bees wandering, and among them, a curious shimmer from the earth. Standing quietly between the blooms are the bolts, once forgotten, once cold. Now each one wears a new color, a new purpose. At TERAFLORA Studio, we often say that gardens are stories written in sunlight. These bolts, painted in the hues of flowers they accompany, coral, ivory, mint, have become the punctuation marks in that living poem. They rise from the soil like gentle reminders that art doesn't have to be loud. It only needs to be sincere. There's something endearing about their stillness. They do not move, yet they hold presence. Each bolt catches the light on its painted edge, echoing the warmth of the morning sun. Their colors play softly against the marigold's gold and the aster's lilac, creating a dialogue between metal and nature, a contrast that feels harmonious rather than harsh. Visitors who pass by often pause. Some lean closer, wondering if the stakes are art or accident. That's the charm, beauty that invites curiosity. The bolts do not need to explain themselves. They simply exist as fragments of industry reborn in the language of flowers. As the day stretches on, shadows dance between blossoms and bolts alike. The garden hums with small movements, petals trembling, wings fluttering, air shimmering with heat, and yet the painted bolts remain steady, grounding it all. Perhaps that's their quiet lesson. Even the hardest materials can learn softness when placed beside life. What was once rough and forgotten now glows with purpose, turning a patch of soil into a field of imagination. And when evening finally comes, as the light fades and the last bees drift home, those bolts still gleam faintly, tiny reflections of persistence and peace. They remind us that beauty isn't born from perfection. It's found in transformation. There's a quiet dignity in every path, the way it leads, the way it invites you to keep walking, not knowing exactly where it ends. At TERAFLORA Studio, we wanted to honor that sense of journey with something humble yet striking. Large bolts once used to bind heavy beams, now standing softly as garden path markers. Each bolt, sanded and painted, finds new life beneath the open sky. They rise from the soil like notes in a gentle melody, terracotta, mint, ivory, colors that hum against the greens and browns of the earth. They guide your steps not with brightness, but with presence, a rhythm of small, patient forms marking the way through the garden. In the early morning, dew clings to their edges. When the sun lifts, the bolts catch light the way old metal remembers to shine, just enough to remind you that age does not dull purpose. The flowers at their feet, asters, marigolds, sedum, seem to lean toward them as if grateful for their quiet strength. These pathway markers don't compete with nature. They simply belong. Like old souls in a young garden, they stand to remind us that beauty isn't only in the bloom. It's in the line that leads us there. Every garden needs rhythm. Every story needs punctuation. The bolts do that for the soil. They organize chaos gently, without control, only companionship. When dusk comes, the painted surfaces glow faintly, reflecting the last amber light of day. They no longer look like metal. They look alive, like they've always been meant to be here, keeping company with roots and stones. And perhaps, as you walk that path, you'll understand what they've become. Not just markers of direction, but witnesses of transformation. A symbol that even the hardest things can be softened by time, purpose, and a touch of color. In their stillness, they whisper what every garden already knows, that renewal begins the moment you choose to see potential where others see waste. In the language of the garden, contrasts are not conflicts, they are conversations. Here, in the quiet corner of a backyard, steel and bamboo speak softly to one another. The bolts, once part of something rigid and industrial, now rest against the smooth, warm rhythm of bamboo. It's a meeting between strength and grace. At TERAFLORA Studio, we've always been drawn to this balance, the way opposites can create harmony when treated with care. The large bolts, painted in sage and ivory, punctuate the fence like thoughtful brushstrokes. They catch the light of the setting sun and reflect it back in subdued tones, as if they've learned restraint from the bamboo they hold. The fence stands not as a barrier, but as a bridge between human craft and nature's stillness. Behind it, the marigolds and asters bloom freely, their colors soft yet vibrant, weaving life into the structured geometry of the bolts and bamboo. The air smells of wood and wet soil. The hum of bees adds a low, grounding note. Every breeze carries a whisper through the hollow reeds. You can almost hear the echo of old tools, the clink of metal, the scent of varnish, the quiet dedication of hands transforming raw materials into something gentle. The bolts do not dominate. They accompany. Their subtle sheen glints between the green stems like quiet signatures of care. As evening deepens, shadows stretch across the fence, and the bolts seem to glow softly, taking on the warmth of the fading light. In that moment, the garden becomes a metaphor for patience, for how beauty often lives in the spaces between contrast and calm. And perhaps that's what makes it memorable. Not just the bamboo's elegance, nor the bolt's endurance, but the story they tell together. A A story of coexistence, of metal that found peace beside wood, of structure softened by nature, of art hidden within simplicity. In every garden, there's a place like this, where the hard becomes humble and the ordinary becomes poetry. Every garden has its hidden heroes, the small, unseen details that hold the beauty above them. At TERAFLORA Studio, we found that strength not in stone or wood, but in metal, the kind once used to hold machines together. Now, those same bolts stand beneath our planters, reborn as quiet supporters of life. There's a certain poetry in watching something industrial become intimate. The large bolts, painted in soft tones of mint and terracotta, lift each clay pot just enough to let air and water flow freely. It's a small gesture, almost invisible, yet it changes everything. The soil breathes better. The plants thrive longer. The garden feels alive in its smallest mechanics. When the morning sun touches them, the bolts gleam faintly beneath the planters, tiny glimpses of craftsmanship among roots and petals. Their colors blend with the earth, humble yet deliberate, grounding the exuberance of blossoms above. Each bolt bears the weight of soil, roots, and time, yet never complains. It simply serves, a steadfast presence in the poetry of growth. There's something deeply comforting about that. In a world obsessed with what's visible, these small details remind us that beauty often depends on what stands quietly beneath it. The bolts may not bloom, but they carry the weight of every flower that does. When evening comes and the air cools, the garden's rhythm slows. Shadows lengthen, and the bolts, now slightly dusted with soil, look as if they've always belonged there, half hidden, half shining, wholly essential. They've become part of the story of endurance, a symbol that even what was once rigid and mechanical can nurture softness and color. And maybe that's what every garden teaches us, that life grows best when strength learns humility, when support becomes art, and when something as simple as a bolt learns how to hold not just weight, but wonder. There's something sacred about still water, the way it holds the sky without effort, the way it gathers silence without asking for it. In this garden corner, that stillness takes shape in a birdbath unlike any other. A mosaic of painted bolts forming a ring around life's simplest ritual, water and reflection. At TERAFLORA Studio, we believe beauty begins where imagination meets patience. Each bolt, once heavy and forgotten, is given a second life here, sanded, painted, and arranged by hand into soft circles of coral, sage, and ivory. Together, they form a quiet harmony, a story told in texture and color. When the morning sun touches the water's edge, the bolts shimmer faintly, not with brilliance but with gentleness. Their colors echo the flowers nearby, the marigold's fire, the aster's calm, the chrysanthemum's quiet joy. Birds visit, fluttering down from the vines, and each time they land, a small ripple travels across the mosaic border, as if the garden itself were breathing. The bolts do not dominate, they support the moment. They hold the basin steady, offering both strength and softness, a reminder that function and art need not live apart. Even the metal, once part of something cold and industrial, now carries warmth, sunlight, and reflection. And in that transformation, there's a lesson. That renewal is not about erasing what something was, but revealing what it could become. The bolts still remember their purpose, but they've learned tenderness, the kind that comes when human hands decide that beauty deserves a second chance. As the day fades, golden light turns the bolts to bronze. The last bird leaves a small ripple behind, a signature of motion on the still surface. And for a moment, everything aligns, the sky, the water, the metal, the earth. Perfect, fleeting balance. It's just a bird bath, perhaps, but in the language of the garden, it's also a meditation. A circle of quiet strength, painted with patience, humming with life. Some beauty hangs quietly above our heads, asking for nothing but light. Under this small wooden pergola, bolts once meant for machines now carry the weight of gentler things. Flowers, lanterns, and the slow rhythm of afternoon breeze. At TERAFLORA Studio, we've always believed in transformation that feels natural, not forced. The large bolts, each painted with a muted grace of sage, ivory, and terracotta, are placed along the pergola beams like quiet guardians. They are sturdy, but softened by color and intention. Where once they held iron frames, now they cradle the fragility of marigolds and asters in bloom. When sunlight filters through the slats, it lands on these bolts like a blessing. Their painted heads catch the glow, reflecting a gentle warmth that feels almost human. Below, petals sway, leaves whisper, and the air smells of cedar and earth. The whole space breathes in rhythm, metal, wood, and nature in quiet agreement. There's poetry in the way strength can become gentleness. The bolts, shaped for utility, now embody care. Each one holds something alive, something beautiful, proof that even the hardest materials can learn tenderness when given a new story to live in. Visitors sometimes notice them only after a moment, drawn first to the flowers. Then, when they look closer, they smile, surprised that something so rough could look so at peace. That is the essence of upcycling art. Not to disguise what a thing once was, but to help it remember its worth. As the evening deepens, small lanterns begin to glow, hanging from those same bolts. Their light flickers softly across the beams, illuminating the painted metal and the vines that wrap around them. The garden feels alive, suspended between shadow and shine. And perhaps that's what makes this corner unforgettable. The quiet realization that beauty doesn't always grow from the soil. Sometimes, it hangs above it, held gently by hands of iron that have learned how to love the weight of life. There's a sound that only wind can write. A soft, wandering melody that finds its way through every space between stillness and motion. In this garden, that melody is sung through bolts, seashells, and driftwood, each one carrying the memory of where it once belonged. At TERAFLORA Studio, we imagined what might happen if the sea could whisper through metal. The result was the bolt wind chime seascape. Large bolts painted in the colors of tide and sand, seafoam green, ivory, pale coral, hanging quietly beneath the pergola, catching both light and air. They do not clang sharply like factory iron. Instead, they chime gently, softened by age and intention. Each bolt moves slightly, its painted surface glinting like wet shells in sunlight. The driftwood pieces creak softly, and the seashells answer with a faint, musical shimmer. Together, they create a sound that feels like memory itself, fragile, rhythmic, and alive. The flowers below, asters, sedum, marigolds, sway in agreement, their stems dancing to the same invisible song. It's a harmony of air and earth, of past and present. You can feel it rather than hear it fully, the way you feel the hush before rain or the sigh of waves retreating from the shore. What was once metal for machines now breathes like part of the wind. It's no longer about purpose or perfection. It's about presence, about how something once forgotten can find grace again when placed where light, air, and patience meet. As the day fades, the bolts glow faintly under the golden light. They turn with the breeze, their motion slow and deliberate, as if remembering each gust. The chime's rhythm slows until it becomes almost a heartbeat, a quiet pulse echoing through the garden. And maybe that's what the wind was always trying to say, that beauty is not only seen or built, but heard in the patience of things reborn. Here, between driftwood and steel, the wind finds its voice, and the garden, once silent, begins to sing. Every garden hides a secret, a story that doesn't bloom in petals, but in patience. Here, among the flowers, something unusual rises. Shapes made not of leaves or stems, but of steel reborn as art. These are the bolt garden sculptures, pieces that once belonged to machines, now standing gracefully in the soil, painted and placed with love. At TERAFLORA Studio, we've always believed that art doesn't end where industry begins. The large bolts, heavy and forgotten, found a new rhythm when reimagined as small sculptures. Birds with wings of painted iron, flowers that never fade, butterflies that stand still but feel alive. Each stroke of paint softens what was once harsh. Each arrangement turns weight into wonder. In the afternoon light, their pastel colors, sage, coral, ivory, seem to hum beside the marigolds and asters. The metal catches the sun, not with a glare, but with warmth. The bolts' shapes, once mechanical, now carry grace. And somehow, they look at home here between roots and petals, soil and sky. There's something deeply moving about giving permanence to impermanence. While real flowers will fade, these sculptures remain, not as replacements, but as reminders that beauty is both fleeting and enduring, natural and crafted, alive and remembered. They invite you to pause, to look closer, to see art not as something displayed, but grown. Sometimes, when the wind passes through the garden, the smallest sculptures tremble slightly, echoing the soft movements of the real blooms nearby. It's as if they're breathing together, the living and the made, sharing the same rhythm of the garden's heart. By evening, when the last light fades, their colors deepen into quiet shades of bronze and rose. They stand still but seem to glow, like thoughts unspoken yet felt. And maybe that's what they are. Not decorations, but quiet witnesses. Fragments of the human hand learning again to speak in the language of nature. Steel may not grow, but here it learns how to belong. And that belonging, perhaps, is the truest art of all. There are tables that hold meals, and there are tables that hold memories. This one, built with hands, patience, and imagination, belongs to the second kind. The bolt-edged patio table isn't merely furniture. It's a conversation between strength and stillness. At TERAFLORA Studio, we imagined what it would feel like to let metal breathe beside wood. Each large bolt, once a piece of machinery, now rests softly along the rim of a garden table, painted in shades that echo the flowers nearby. Mint like sedum leaves, coral like asters, ivory like early sunlight. Together, they frame not just a surface, but a story. The table sits beneath a canopy of vines, bathed in morning light. Around it, marigolds nod gently in the breeze. The bolts glimmer faintly, their colors muted but alive, catching the rhythm of the day. There's no sharpness here, no hard edge, just the quiet harmony of contrasts. Metal and grain, art and function, time and touch. It's where moments happen slowly. A cup of tea cooling beside an open book. Paint-stained fingers resting after a long morning in the garden. The sound of a bee tracing the same path between sedum blooms. You might not notice the bolts at first. They don't demand attention. They offer presence. Their curve follows the roundness of the wood, a perfect balance between durability and grace. They stand for the kind of beauty that endures, the kind built to last through rain, sunlight, and silence. By evening, when the garden glows gold, the bolts catch the last light of the day. They shimmer briefly, then fade into the softness of dusk, leaving only their shape and purpose behind. The table becomes part of the garden itself, a place where time feels slow, where the air carries the scent of soil and wood. And maybe that's what this design means most of all, that art doesn't have to be grand to be meaningful. Sometimes it's just a circle of bolts around a table, holding not only the structure in place, but also every quiet moment shared above it. Every garden has its quiet teachers, the unseen forms that guide beauty upward, one tendril at a time. Here, in the space between sunlight and shadow, stands a trellis whose purpose is gentle yet profound. Its strength lies not only in wood, but in the bolts that hold it together, painted softly, like whispers in color. At TERAFLORA Studio, we've always loved contrasts that feel like harmony. The large bolts, brushed in tones of sage, ivory, and bronze, anchor each beam of the trellis with quiet grace. They do not dominate. They belong. Around them, vines curl and reach. Japanese anemone, clematis, and sedum weaving a slow choreography of life. Every morning, light catches the bolt surfaces and turns them into small beacons. Dew slides from petal to metal, uniting what's organic and crafted. It's a meeting of patience and precision, of design and growth. The trellis doesn't command the plants. It simply offers direction, a structure for them to discover their own shape. And perhaps that's what makes it beautiful, the way it supports without stealing attention. The bolts stand as reminders that art can be humble, that function can hold poetry if treated with care. Even the smallest detail, the curve of paint, the shimmer of bronze in the sun, adds to the rhythm of the garden's living architecture. By afternoon, when the air grows warm, the flowers lean into the trellis, their shadows tracing soft patterns across the wood. The bolts glow faintly, like jewelry forgotten by time. There's something serene in their stillness, an acceptance of their role as quiet enablers of beauty. And when dusk arrives, the vines seem to rest upon them, secure and steady. The trellis, adorned with bolts that once knew only machinery, now holds the story of transformation, a reminder that strength, when gentle, becomes art. In this garden, the bolts don't just hold pieces of wood together. They hold the delicate truth that growth always needs a frame, and that even the hardest materials can learn to nurture life. There are moments when a garden stops being just a place and becomes a gallery. In this quiet corner, art and earth share the same breath. What was once a collection of bolts, ordinary, heavy, forgotten, now adorns the curve of planters that hold entire worlds of color. At TERAFLORA Studio, we've always seen beauty in what waits to be rediscovered. The bolt planter art installation was born from that belief, a vision where each large bolt becomes a brushstroke, a heartbeat in metal form. Painted in soft shades of mint, coral, and ivory, the bolts are not merely attached, they're composed. Their arrangement flows like petals in motion, turning each pot into a sculpture that both holds and becomes life. Under morning light, the bolts shimmer faintly as dew clings to their painted heads. The marigolds spill over the edges, asters climb upward, and sedum fills every quiet gap. The result is not chaos, but chorus, a union of geometry and growth. Every curve of metal mirrors the rhythm of leaves and stems around it. Visitors often pause here. Some see art, others see a reminder that beauty is not always new nor perfect, can be welded, painted, mended, can rise again from what was cast aside. The bolts, once made to fasten and hold, now express something softer. Connection between human and nature, between what endures and what blooms briefly. By afternoon, sunlight warms their surfaces, deepening the pastel tones into whispers of gold. The planters seem to hum, alive with color and quiet pride. As evening falls, shadows wrap around them like a sigh, the kind of silence that follows creation. What remains is not just design, but devotion. To give life to what was lifeless, to paint tenderness on what was once cold, to let steel and soil share the same purpose, to grow. And perhaps that's what every artist of the garden learns in the end, that true beauty doesn't stand above nature, stands with it. And sometimes, it begins with something as simple as a bolt, learning how to bloom. As the light fades and the garden exhales its last warmth of day, we're reminded that beauty doesn't always shout. It often whispers. Among the flowers and gentle colors, the bolts, the wood, the painted shapes, all of them have found a quiet belonging. Each piece, once forgotten, now holds its place in the rhythm of life, steady and calm. At TERAFLORA Studio, every creation begins with a single thought. That transformation is not about perfection, but about care. A garden, after all, is not built overnight. It grows through seasons, through patience, through the hands that choose to see potential instead of waste. And perhaps that's what art truly is. Not something we make, but something we allow to happen when we give nature a second voice. In this gentle meeting of craft and soil, of human touch and time, the garden becomes a poem we can walk through. Teaches us that nothing is ever truly lost, only waiting to be seen again. The bolts may no longer hold machines, but they now hold light, soil, and the quiet joy of renewal. If this story has brought you peace or inspiration, we invite you to stay with us, to subscribe to TERAFLORA Studio and be part of a growing world, where every idea, every object, every bloom has meaning. Thank you for walking with us through this garden of rebirth and reflection. Until next time, may your hands stay curious, and may your garden always find its song.